You know, I normally don't teleport in this kitchen unless I've been lied to. Whoa! Hello one, hello all, this is the gothiest ghost of them all, Caspa in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Iglooghost-Tidal Memory EXO. This is the latest album from UK-based producer Iglooghost, who has truly become one of my favorite producers of all time, who I first discovered over his amazing debut EP, along with a handful of others, and also his fantastic debut album. I loved how innovative his approach to electronic music was, using his influence from the 90s and even from that present time. I feel like they found a balance between sweet and colorful, but could also make it chaotic as well. But also there was a complexity to it that kept me engaged, that was hard for me to wrap my mind around, and still to this day when I hear it, I am still very much in like a daze whenever I hear it. So with his creativity and complexity, it's definitely kept me engaged with how mind-bending and exhilarating the listening experience could be. His last album, while I didn't love it, I found it to be interesting in theory and commendable that he would try out something new and something different. But I found most of the tracks to be stale in comparison to the other tracks on that album. But I feel like on this one, he is showing that the capability that that album had is on this album on full blast, and that he's really filling in the blanks from his previous work. Because I would say while this is murky, gloomy, it is still very explosive, and I find there to be, compared to his earlier output, the abstract madness that that earlier work had, and what the last album was actually missing. Like the cover here, it's very hazy, it's very foggy, not as colorful but still exciting, and there are still risks taking here, like on the cover. Like my guy is DJing in the water. Sir, you are walking the line. But I digress. And after listening to the singles to this album, I was convinced that this album would be fire, and after giving this numerous listens, I was right. It's fire. It's fire. And it definitely proved to me that Iglooghost is definitely capable of his expansion of creativity, and those ideas are definitely realized on this album. And I say that not only sonically, but also I would say thematically as well. Because on this one, the theme is the water carrying a plague, there being chemicals in the water, which has led to this dystopian post-apocalyptic society. And honestly, it kind of reminds me of Adventure Time just a little bit, as I'm likening the musical output to that show, with how fun and blissful and silly, but yet still engaging that show was, and his early output was, to now that has this opaque, nocturnal, dystopian future we're seeing right now. But his music is still mind-bending, it's still overwhelming, for sure. And going back to the singles such as Coral Mimic and New Species, the songs are dark, they're pounding, they're dense, and manic. The tangibility of the intensity of these tracks does not disappoint. And there's tracks on here that definitely correlate to what you're hearing within the sound bits of the album. If it's not the sound bits, it's the mood, it's the texture. Like on Flea, that features these electronic distorted vocal samples that are just skipping and malfunctioning with these blippy keys. Synthy bass, and I love how pounding and jittery the production is, along with the vocal skips that really play into the hazy dystopia that this album presents. It's like with these rapid throbbing drums, swirling keys, I could picture the protagonist having these avid flashbacks that lead to the event of the world that we're living in now, just trying to collect everything that has happened. The woozy but weeping keys on Spawn 01, along with the forlorn somberness of the synth horns. It's very heavy, moody, and emotive, and the chunky bass and all this going on within the atmosphere does make the track feel very aquatic. And I feel like I'm in a blissful dream state that just keeps me in a getaway from the devastation that I'm living in. Also, I feel there's a departure from the fast, unintelligible chipmunk vocals we had on Neo Wax Bloom, because now we're getting more coherent vocals, but are also non-sampled, and definitely more build, and I feel they add focus to the futuristic component of this album. The song Choral Mimic is probably the most mind-bending track on here, probably gives me the most acceleration that I've had in a song in a long time, as I'm getting these nightmarish, distorted chants. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the Tales of the Macabre intro, with these distorted chants just slapping against the soundscape. Like, it's really insane, because while simultaneously I feel like this thing is just like zooming out of this picture, like I'm having out-of-body experience just slapping and just zooming out, but it also feels like my brain is like in a speeding car and it is just going to overdrive when I'm literally standing in one place. And even though Flux Cocoon is very dark and eerie, it's still probably the catchiest on this album, and very instantaneous, with these beautiful spacious synths that are immediately bombarded by this monstrous bass that's followed by these very glitchy but beautiful tense passages. And I also love the chemistry between the two featured guests. Also, I do love how Igloo is definitely paying homage and definitely expanding on the drill and bass genre and making it sound more weighty, definitely more aggressive and futuristic, like on Pulse Angel. Although there is rapping on this track, I do feel this is a precursor to UK drill rap for the foreseeable future. And I also love the fuzzy, wintry synth lines that are on here. They're very vast, they're very beautiful, and remind me of Injury Reserve's last album, By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And also Nematode was another highlight for me. Probably has one of the steadiest grooves on here, with its skittery rhythms but snapping drums, which has a huge droney, bassy crescendo. It's very sporadic, it's very layered, it's extremely sequenced to absolute perfection that reminds me kind of a very futuristic but like grim electropop that would have been done like in the 80s. And the song Chlorine Intermission definitely serves as that, still serving to the theme of water, the dystopia, the chemicals that are in the water. And I will say near the end, the tracks do kind of paint themselves into a corner a bit. I do find them less engaging, less exciting than the highlights. This thing definitely has a solid ending. I love how it's dreamy, but still visceral and pounding, and glitchy with some beautiful sections in between the chaos that leads to this very back and forth modulated pounding moments. That leads to these very modulated but visceral moments, but still are able to maintain the lushness. I do find this album to be, for the most part, a very great example of the expansion of Iglooghost creativity, because for the most part this thing is fantastic, definitely delivered in a very dismal but very explosive experience. And this album does definitely take me to another world. And although I love the debut, this is definitely Igloo's best yet, and proving why he's one of the best producers in the game right now. And again, I think he did a great job at the world creating he did here, even if I feel the opener could have been stronger. I'm feeling 4 black hearts out of 5 on this album. If you've given this album a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And that's it. Caspa, Gothic Ghost, Iglooghost, Tidal Memory EXO. Till we meet again.